All right, next we have Rao here to give his talk on LLMs, which is awesome because the last talk was just how LLMs can be used for financial planning. And it's great to introduce Rao because Rao is someone who doesn't need any introduction, I think, especially to the ICAPS community. Sheila, come on in.
I'm gonna grab a chair and bring it in.
Can LLMs manufacture chairs?
Depends who you ask. All right, all yours, Rao.
Thank you. Thank you all. So it's the very end of the day and my second day of being in Prague. So I'm still suffering from jet lag. So I try my best to get all my adrenaline going, but if I fall asleep, one of you please wake me up. Okay. Let's see. This one, can I put this to the no, let's put it in there.
You can put it in, but I don't know whether it'll work.
No, it will work. Oh. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you about LLMs and plan. LLMs and planning, and actually this is a short version, mostly about the work that we did. But I can't give talks without perspective, so this also has perspective about other work that's going on. But I'm also going to do a 3-hour tutorial tomorrow. So if you like this, show up for that. So we'll be talking about LLMs and where they can plan. And the answer is they can't plan, at least not the way you guys define planning. But they can help you in planning. And that's what we're going to be showing. Okay, is anybody not aware of what LLMs are? So none of you reviewed the paper that we submitted to ICAPS where the reviewer said there should be more description of what LLMs are. Anyway, so that's when I decided I'll give a tutorial about LLMs and planning. So apparently we have reviewers who don't have LLM virgins and are left in ICAPS land. Okay, so but it's still useful to have a very quick background about this perspective. Think of LLMs as n-gram models and steroids. You've heard of 1-gram models, 2-gram models, 5-gram models. ChatGPT is a 30,000 word gram model. That means given the 3,000, given the last 3,000 words, what is the most likely next word? I can go into more details about what that gives in terms of the intuitive failures in our understanding of how this works. But keep that in mind that it's an n-gram model, and you're essentially training these on every possible thing, every possible English sentence that has ever been written on the web. So some 600 gigabytes of thing. But basically, even though they are n-gram models, and n-gram models are taught to basically intro AI students, making a 3,000 word gram model actually presents all sorts of interesting problems, because the same 3,000 words will never again occur second time. So you'll get degenerate probabilities. Secondly, the number of configurations of 3,000 word sequences, assuming 50,000 is an approximate vocabulary, is 50,000 power 3,000. So the table has to be a huge big table which will have degenerate numbers. The interesting magic about LLMs is that these counts are approximated essentially, and when you approximate it, they're actually numbers, and in fact the performance seems to show that they seem to be actually having all these amazing capabilities that make us think that they are speaking English the way we speak. Okay. Also, it's important to remember that they have superhuman training. Essentially, none of you, I know there are some of you are actually undergrads and grads and so on, maybe not undergrads, but grad students, especially PhD students who have a lot of time to look on the web and read everything. You haven't read even a tiny fraction of what LLM has done. And so thinking that you know what LLM has read is one of the first flaws, cognitive flaws that you need to get out of. We have no idea what reading 600 gigabytes, reading in terms of actually processing 600 gigabytes of data means. Okay. So then the interesting thing is that these actually seem to have shown all sorts of interesting behavior. And why are they able to show these behaviors? But how can these prompt completion be? All they are doing for LLM, everything is a prompt with the next word to be completed. So take the, whatever it says, and then you write something, then it takes the last 3,000 words and predicts the next word. That's basically what it's doing. And yet you are seeing a lot of interesting meaning in it. And the meaning is in your head. And it's not that we're all delusional. It does seem to make sense, especially things like financial plans, which are a joke anyway, because otherwise I would have been a billionaire by now if somebody could give me financial plans correctly. So why do these work? Awesome. The actual answer is magic, because nobody really knows why a 3,000 word gram model or a trillion word gram model seems to have these capabilities. In fact, we as AI, we used to be computer science people, we used to be theory people, we have become ersatz biologists. Okay, we look at these LLMs as if they are some sort of alien creatures. We're poking and prodding to see what do they do. And so the new ones are stuff like a dog and a cat. You have a bard and a chat GPT and whatever other models. Okay, so I actually wrote the way the whole research in our field has changed in terms of AI becoming an ersatz natural science. Did I leave my cell phone somewhere? Thank you. Not cell phone. Okay, that's fine. Hopefully. Oh, that's not the one. Anyway, so we'll worry about that. But some possible reasons as to why we are surprised is almost everything we know is also already on the web. And completion over 3,000 word or trillion word context is not something for which you have any intuitions over. Just like you have no intuitions over what happens if I peel epsilon peel of a n-dimensional apple where n is 10,000. The moment you peel, there's no apple left. That's not your intuition, but that's true in the high dimensions. Okay, so our poor intuitions about approximate omniscience of LLMs is actually the reason why we are very easily impressed by everything that LLMs seem to be doing. This is something that you want to keep in mind. One of the things that you may want to say is, what is reasoning? If I give you A, it's true, A implies B is true, and then if you said B, then I say, oh, wow, that's reasoning. But what if I gave you A is true, A implies B is true, and B is true? That means I gave you not only the facts, but the deductive closure of the facts. Then you're not doing any reasoning, you're just retrieving from the deductive closure. The reason we don't retrieve from deductive closure is because we have a life, we have a small brain, and we have a lot of things to worry about. We don't want to keep everything in our head. We actually want to do reasoning from first principles. So the idea of when do you consider LLMs to be reasoning is a fraught one, because if it has sort of seen the answer and it reproduces it, you would think it is reasoning, but it's actually not reasoning. It's basically retrieving from the deductive closure. And one of the things that people don't understand, none of us understand, is how much stuff is on the web. For example, one of the reasons people are surprised when Bard came out is it could actually explain jokes. And they'll say, wow, an LLM that can explain jokes. How many of you know that there are sites on the web which explain jokes for people who are humor challenged? And there are similarly sites on the web that explain endings of the movies. There's all sorts of junk out there. You have no idea. And this guy knows everything. And unfortunately, this is not indexing everything. So one thing that you have to remember is it's not indexing and retrieving. It is actually an n-gram model. So it has a non-veridical memory. Veridical memory means you index and retrieve, the usual database people that we make notes about. The good thing about database people, however boring they are, is that they'll never make up stuff. LLMs, on the other hand, are essentially completing the prompt. And so sometimes they impress you because you didn't write it before. Wow, it's good, and it made it. Sometimes it makes it up, which actually is wrong. And if you don't know the answer to the question that you're asking LLM, all bets are off. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, in fact, that's something to keep in mind. So keep that in the back of your head and say, so can LLMs plan? Well, when people are saying LLMs can do everything, a while back, I basically asked it, Sussman anomaly problem. I hope you know what Sussman anomaly problem is. So, there's a whole bunch of, I had no what to do. I was asking it, and then basically it doesn't do the planning. I keep asking it, this is the problem, this is the problem. And finally, after 2 pages of interactions, gives the answer to this 3 stacking problem. So it's like LLMs really are multi-shot apologetic planners that would rather use you as their world model than actually do planning. So what I was doing there is giving it away the answer. If you read the whole thing, I'm slowly nudging it towards the answer. I could do it because I know the answer. Okay, and that's something that you have to keep in mind. So we actually shown this more formally by taking IPC domains, including the blocks word. This was almost a year and a half back, and showing that GPT-3 at that time, which was like the latest at that time, basically sucks at generating blocks word plans. Okay, so it basically sucks very badly. And this was a paper in foundation. By the way, the word foundation models itself is a fraught thing. LLMs are n-gram models, we just call it that. And you will be much happier that way than to think that this is the foundations of AI, because that would be a really, really shaky foundation. Okay, so this was, people were surprised. One of the funny things is these days, saying that LLMs can't do something, people are skeptical. Hey, it should be able to do everything, because the other day I asked it a question, it gave me the answer, and I happen to know the answer. And so I knew that it was correct. So in fact, it was an interesting enough surprise that it was written up in the press, and a bunch of people like Jan and some of others, anybody who actually has any sense about whether or not what reasoning is, can tell that LLMs cannot possibly reason. This was not surprising, so that's good. But then GPT-4 came along. Microsoft gave $25 billion and found that it's Sparky. Okay, my question was whether GPT-4 Sparks improved the blocks word planning abilities. Okay, this is ChatGPT, the GPT 3.5, GPT-3, GPT 3.5, and then GPT-4. Well, does it? Okay, so here actually this is the paper that we have that's available on Arc. I'll show you the papers in the end. But we actually did like a pretty thorough study. I mean, even though I was cringing saying, why am I doing this? But you guys don't want to believe me, so I had to do this to show you that it actually can't do planning. So essentially, we took a PDL generated problem and converted the prompt in either language, NLP, natural language, or as PDL itself. And by the way, people might think English and PDL are different. PDL are different. LLMs, it's just sequences. Okay, so there's not much of a difference. So you can do LLM text prompting, PDL prompting. You can do one-shot prompting, multi-shot prompting in both detection and PDL. And then you make the basically given a problem. We took IPC benchmarks. We generated 500 problems in each benchmark, and then we essentially give it as a prompt to LLM, and then see if it gives a correct answer. And because these are IPC benchmarks, and there is Val that's sitting there in the back of the room, and so basically Val can check whether the answer is correct or not. And there is no partial credit, right? It's like, I know I'm this close. No, you're right or you're wrong. Okay. And so if he did this, unfortunately, again, you'll see that it's pretty bad. It actually is not correct most of the time. Okay. So GPT-4 improves compared to the pretty small performance of GPT-3. Okay. The question, of course, is it went up to 34%. So 34% of the time, on the 10 block stacking, 10-step block stacking plans, it's correct. The rest of the time, you basically call FF or FD and do it. So in which case, then you will say, why not just call FF and FD? Why am I doing this? Well, you're doing this because you want a paper in NeurIPS or IIII or ICAPS even, because I use LLM mom and see, this is, but that's a cynical thing, but keep that in mind. So anyway, GPT-4 seems to do okay. GPT-3 still 30%. GPT-3.5 is much worse. Instead, GPT-3 is a slightly better version of GPT-3, which essentially does RLHF fine-tuning. It does slightly better than GPT-3. GPT-3 was the 1.5-year-old thing, which basically sucks big time. They all suck, but it's a question of the degree of suckiness. So how does plan prompts look like? They look like this. So I'm showing you that this is a prompt for a particular PDL problem, and you give so in our case, we give the domain model and we give the problem. Here's initialize, here's the goal state, give me the problem. And then we tell it that, of course, actions have to be from the domain model. And so it essentially then comes up with a sequence of actions, and then we check. We take, if you say you are a planning expert, that's what I'll do to you. You give the plan, then I'll check whether it's correct or not. Okay. Remember, at least here we can check because thankfully there's Val. in a world where there's no val, you will make something and say, oh, well, looks like LLM gave it. It must be a good plan. And then I'll try to execute it. I might get run over by a bus. That is the world that we do. Okay. Well, one of the interesting things, none of you care about it, but when we did this, actually, the learning people were very worried. What is going on with LLMs being subjected to this kind of scrutiny? No real humans actually know how to do blocks for planning either. And these are people who have actually been mostly sticking around with, I think, Tuckers on Amazon, that they really didn't believe that anybody can actually stack blocks. And by the way, when I was saying block stacking problems, but I'm talking about blocks world, but we actually used like 10 or so of the IPC domains. So essentially, what we are doing is nothing domain specific. We are taking the domain, we're taking the problems, and we're just doing it as a problem. It turns out humans are actually, even poorly paid workers are 78% of the time correct. Okay, this was when we did this. By the way, nowadays, I don't know how many of you know this, workers realize they're getting paid too little. And so they call ChatGPT for any question that you ask workers to do. And so ChatGPT gives the answer. And so, in fact, these numbers might be much worse now. Okay, keep that in mind. Okay, so the one interesting thing is the GPT-4 came up with 34%. You may be one of these people thinking 34% is pretty darn good enough for planning accuracy. My worry is it really reasoning or is it retrieving approximately? Remember, everything, including the benchmarks that we made for 1.5 years back, were part of the entire web shot, which was actually used for training the GPT-4. Okay, they were not trying to cheat specifically me, they were specificating the entire world. So one of the interesting things is coming up with benchmarks that will shake the abilities of LLMs is a losing proposition. Remember the poor Ernie Davis who came up with Vinograd schemas, promptly they were put on the web. So Vinograd schemas actually can be answered by LLMs. How many of you have taken interviews where you know the answers to the questions that they're asking? Because you basically looked at the question bank for the interviews. There are only few suckers left who actually go to an interview or an exam and try to use their first principles reasoning abilities. Right? And my favorite question is, why are manhole covers round? If you have never heard about this, you are thinking in the background why they are round. But this is like a famous question. It's been written up everywhere. So when you ask this question to your interview candidate, all you know is if the sucker has ever read any question banks or not whether they can do first principles reasoning. That's exactly what I'm worried about for GPT-4. So, what if GPT-4 is basically bringing to bear its background knowledge about blocks world instead of just depending on the domain model that I gave you? That's what I asked you to do. Well, let's think a second about Drew McDermott, who passed away, who actually was the guy who did this mystery domain. Because if LLMs can cheat, it's because humans also have cheated. Back in '98, when we started IPC, and even later on, people were worried that you will actually say you're doing domain independent planning, but you will use string comparison to figure out which domain you are in and try to solve it, right? So he made a mystery domain. What he did was he essentially changed the words. So you could do this too. We actually changed the words in Box World to a different set of words. We did two of the kinds. One is meaning-bearing words that just kind of mislead because the meaning, they do have meaning, so they trigger wrong associations to the LLM. The other is complete nonsensical strings. Okay, now you in this room would not say this is bad because, as Shakespeare said, a rose by any other name will smell as nice. And a Black-Scholes problem by any predicate name change would be the same damn Black-Scholes problem. Right? So if you know that you're doing reasoning, you better do this thing too. So what happens? The moment I do this in the mystery world, the performance of mighty GPT-4 has come down to 0.16%. Okay, and that's for the deceptive one means basically I'm using words which have meaning. Not specific, anything word which has meaning so that it will get the wrong kind of association. This one is randomized, it's not much better than either. As you believe. So, and then these are more of the results on comparative results on all of them. There are papers on this. So when this came up on Twitter, basically, this was the time when all these sparks of AGI were happening and people were worried that GPT-4 is going to spark and do that stuff. So I basically said, well, if you're worried about GPT-4 going rogue and killing you all, worry not. Planning has got your back. You can ask it to solve any simple few-step classical planning problem and snuff that AGI Spark right out of GPT-4 because right, it's like very bad. Okay. Again, remember, if you're doing reasoning, then word name shouldn't matter. This is something that we know from first. Okay. So will LLMs do better if they do step-by-step plan generation? This is one of these other things that people talk about. So if apparently they think about, let me do it step by step, it will start doing better. I mean, the amount of pseudoscience which has become science is just breathtaking in LLMs. Okay, and there's only so many hours in the day for you to sit down and show that this paper is wrong, this paper is wrong, this paper is wrong. So you just give up. Okay, so anyway, so can they do step-by-step reasoning? It turns out that we gave it a step-by-step reasoning. When I asked you to do step-by-step reasoning, I say, okay, here is what planning is. So basically, here's the way you show to yourself that the plan is correct. The way you can show yourself how a plan is correct for a classical planning problem, either by progression proof, a regression proof, or a causal link proof, for example. So I can actually do the progression proof, which is basically state tracking. So imagine that you make sure that you only do the action and its the conditions are holding, blah, blah, blah. And you tell this and say, do this. When I ask you to do step by step, I'll say step by step, but then I won't keep looking at your step and say, oh, no, this step is wrong. No, this step is wrong. If I'm doing that, then I'm actually solving the problem for you. You might think I'm not, but I'm not. Basically, I'm only telling you when you're wrong. That means I'm telling you how to go towards right. So it's extremely important to know that when people are prompting LLM, there is this idea called clever hands effect. There used to be in Europe, these magical hearts that can do arithmetic. It can say 4 plus 3, and it will stomp exactly 7 times. If you say 12 minus 4, it will stomp exactly 8 times. So it was, going to ICAPs like conferences to show off its abilities, right? And then the owner was kind of very famous, and then people said this is obviously pseudoscience, and they were actually able to prove that essentially what the horse was doing was it was sensing the increasing tension of the question asker, who also happens to be vested in the horse's success. And so, when you come very close to the number of things, then it can sense the tension and say, maybe I should stop now. And stop. So what it was sensing was the emotion. Okay, was the owner trying to cheat? No, it wasn't deliberate cheating. But once you are in the loop and once you start giving this kind of prompting, you are actually solving the problem in different ways. And it's extremely important to understand how not to do that. Okay, so we actually did it by just giving a meta prompt saying this is what you're supposed to do. And so we actually wrote a meta prompt and said, okay, use this. This is what it means when we say step by step. That's not enough. It turns out, because what it needs is holding hands and say, no, this time you're right, this time you're wrong. And you have to understand when I say this, I'm actually helping you solve the problem. It turns out this is basically, by the way, called chain of thought prompting. It's like big outside. It only makes sense if you know the answer and you're actually trying to help LLM get the answer. Sometimes it's reasonable because I want to write a very good essay and I know which essay looks better. So I keep saying, do this, try to avoid and try to use more articles like, Akshat and I, when we write English, we think the is a nonsensical word. So we'll write English and throw in a few does because we don't know how to use it. So then we can say, just put some does so that Derek would be happy. And if you put it, Derek will be happy. These are good kinds of examples where the success is not a binary metric. You guys chose planning, classical planning, the one that everybody wants to make fun of, but it has a binary success criteria. Either you're right or you're wrong. That's not going to be good if, in fact, you're trying to give away the answer. So, not surprisingly, chain of thought prompting doesn't work for planning either. Okay, what if we fine-tune LLMs with successful plans in the domain? Yes, you can do that, but in doing so, in essence, you are increasing its approximate retrieval potential to be more closer to the task at hand. So when somebody says finance GPT, Bloomberg's finance GPT, it takes a normal GPT and adds even more finance data so that it's even better, slightly better at doing this approximate retrieval. It turns out that it actually requires significant amount of fine-tuning for it to improve performance. In our example, our results basically show that it doesn't improve that much unless you give tons and tons and tons of examples. And if you give tons and tons and tons of examples, at some point of time, you have to ask yourself, was it easier for me to give 10 million Bloxworld planning problem solutions? Are the extremely hard 3-action or 4-action specification of the Bloxworld? Which one is the hardest, right? And you have to ask yourself that. Okay. So looks like by the time Daniel showed up, that we have showed that LLMs can't plan. Okay. But so the question then is, why is so in fact this has become reasonably agreed upon by several people. Jan was giving a talk the other day and he was talking about, several people talking about how reasoning does a potential reasoning ability seen by LLMs are mostly a mirage. And this is Josh Tenenbaum and co talking about the fact that language and thought, while related, are not one the same. And this one is our LLM still can't plan 1.5 years. So it looks like some of the people agree. And yet there are all these papers. And these are only papers that I put there. Okay. So chain of thought prompting elicits reasoning, chain of symbol prompting elicits planning, large language models are zero-shot reasoners. The craziest thing is there is so many papers with the word plan or planning in URIP submissions. 5 years back, they asked me to review, and then I say plan, there will be 2 papers. Now everybody is doing planning because they're not doing planning, they're actually asking LLMs to do planning. Okay, and they don't know whether it's right or wrong, but there are all these papers. And these are respectable people. Remember, the owner of Clever Hands was a respectable person. He wasn't trying to cheat the world. He just did not know that the stupid horse was actually sensing his angst. Okay, right? Keep that in mind. So why this divide? Why is it that the NeurIPS community and IPLR community has all these papers saying planning this, planning that none of you guys look at, and whereas they're actually apparently eating your lunch. There are actually best paper award papers about LLMs planning abilities in pretty respectable conferences like Forum. Okay, so that basically makes you think that it's not deliberate cheating by anybody. It's actual misunderstanding. So when people disagree that much, it would be about blind man and an elephant. They're seeing different pieces of the elephant and they're describing it and they don't see the full picture. Since I'm tall enough, I can see the full picture. Okay, so what is planning and what are LLMs good at? This is the slide that you want to really understand. You should know anyway. Planning involves planning knowledge, actions, preconditions, and effects, general recipes, task reduction schemata, for example, in HDL planning, old examples of plans, successful plans, such as case libraries. All of this is considered planning. Okay, and then plan generation verification techniques. Given a plan, can I check that it is correct? And can I generate a plan from scratch if the plan is not present in my library? Okay, this one requires interaction analysis and resolution. This is one thing that you guys know, right? And plan merging techniques, plan modification techniques, all of the stuff that we have been working on in some. Now, coming back to what we do, AI planning people do, is I guess people assume that the planning knowledge is given upfront in a particular format, PDF. In fact, we used to give this knowledge in much more richer formats. We used to have HTN planning. We used to have PL plan, again, Bacchus, fucking Bacchus, rest of the piece. There used to be all these knowledge-based planning techniques because we knew that planning, there's nothing wrong in giving knowledge. But somehow we convince ourselves that it's cheating to give knowledge. You know what I'm saying? And so we should only do PDL description, and then we should use FFRFT to actually look for all the interactions. This is the stuff that we're good at. Okay, but so we are not pure as driven snow. We have ignored what is considered planning by most of the people outside of this room. So if you go and tell your mom, I'm doing planning, and she says, so do you have a plan for making an omelet? And you say, no, that's not, there's no blocks involved, there's no interaction, I don't want to do it. That's not good. If people want planning, we should be out there selling them plans. Why are we ignoring the model acquisition part? Because we didn't like it somehow. But anyway, that's the stuff we ignored and we focused on the search aspect. LLMs trained as they are on the entire damn web have this sort of approximate omniscience. So they can give you an approximate plan for everything. How do I make Spanish omelette in South Indian style? They'll give you some stuff. Right? In fact, they will never shut up. They're trained not to ever shut up. Okay, and then if you like it, this becomes a great Rorschach test. Oh, looks like a darn good thing. In fact, a New York Times writer actually asked ChatGPT for recipes for Thanksgiving and then made them, and she had to eat them. Very bad. Okay, so she had to unfortunately write a story about it. Okay, but so LLMs trained as they are on everything ever put on the web have a kind of approximate omniscience that we don't have good intuitions about it. So we are constantly surprised. Wow, it knows how to make a Spanish South Indian omelette. Okay, don't mention the fact that it's an oxymoronic omelette, but it seems to know how to make it. But they lack the ability to stitch the recipes together to ensure that there actually interaction. The stuff that you guys care about, it doesn't do. Okay, so if I'm right, one of the things I could have done is take the same IPC domains, relax the heck out of them, right? So remove the delete conditions, they will become only positive interactions. Remove preconditions, they're always executable. Every action is always executable. So two big types of errors. And in fact, as you do those relaxations, LLM's performance improves totally. So if you're into very relaxed planning, that's the place to do. But even there, it actually is not fully improving because it turns out that at the minimum, you need to do back chaining from the goal until the initial state. Even that they can't do. There's no guarantee. That's why there is still red there. It should be green by now. In fact, in ICAPS, we say, we removed preconditions, we removed delete, we're going to have an IPC competition. Everybody jumps on that. Competition for you. So then how come LLMs are trumpeted? Come on in, Steve.
I can't get
No,
it.
you
I'm
can
like
sit here.
crushing
You can
you.
sit here. Yeah.
You're some kind of rock star.
I know. In this small room, I am.
It's like a food concert.
Then now how come LLMs are trumpeted as doing planning? If that's all of that difference. This is a very useful thing because you need to have a trick. Okay. So most cases where LLMs are claimed to generate executable plans and closer examination turn out to be cases where LLMs are getting by with generating approximate recipes. And people say, yeah, like suppose the kind of things they're extremely good at doing are wedding plans and of course finance plans, financial advice plans. Because nobody knows what the heck is the correct or wrong wedding plan, correct or wrong. I mean, if you don't even have a bride and a groom and what are you doing wedding is the only problem, but otherwise it's very easy stuff at a high level. The hard part is in the details. Actually making the conference run is hard. Give me a plan for running ICAP. So I'll write a nice essay. Roman is not going to improve by reading that essay. He had to make sure that there are rooms, there are chairs, there are people, etc. Okay. So in fact, you would be surprised how many of what we call plans outside actually have this property. Except when you come to ICAPS, you think that's not plans. The real plans are the ones that involve interaction resolution. There are also plans. You should remember that it's just a cheaper, easier one, but there's the hard part with actually having the knowledge. Or converts tasks into approximate task reduction schemas. There are papers upon papers. In fact, one of those papers that I've shown earlier in units, essentially, which take a high-level task and write a piece of code, and they call code as policies. What the heck is code as policies? You know who wrote code as policies first? Dana. He had shop. Dana is the LLM who converted the task into basically FF programs. Now this thing is going to write some programs. You can write it in any language you want. You can write in natural language. You can write also in code. And if it's code, then the thing you might say is, well, the code looks good. It has all the right number of parentheses and all the semicolons are there. It's fine. If it is actual code as in LLM assistance, you know what happened there, the pilot assistance. Because for the real code, there are interpreters that are very quickly able to check whether at least the code works. Syntactic check itself is a reasonable advantage there. in plans, if they don't work, you only know at the end of the day when you try to execute it and you fail pretty miserably. You understand what I'm saying? And people basically try to avoid this by saying, I have a simulator. Simulator never dies. Apparently, people can't write pre-action description of the blocks world. There are tons and tons of people trying to write big simulators. They must be very easy to write. I don't know how it becomes that, but that's exactly human given knowledge. The world, when you fail, the world doesn't say, wow, you failed because of the following reason. Simulator, on the other hand, will. You see what I'm saying? So these are the things that people actually misunderstand and outside, and also you may be impressed because they're saying all these plans. So in fact, I have come up with these new names just for you here, LLM HTN and LLM CBR. These are HTN and CBR approaches that some of you old enough and don't have enough hair would remember. Some of the younger people with no hair, I don't know what they are. But the ones old enough will remember that HTN plans requires task reduction schemas. If we are bitching and moaning about writing PDD and descriptions, where the heck are we having time to write task reduction schemas? Only Pascal Berker seems to think people will write this stuff. Well, Pascal is actually a lucky guy because people may not write it. LLMs will give you some approximate schemas that people can correct if they want. Okay, and similarly, LLM CBR required cases to be stored. LLM is actually is approximate version of spitting out cases on demand, except none of them were real cases because it's essentially learning an n-gram model over all the sequences. So those are things that are worth looking into. But obviously here the correctness of the plans that we're giving is completely out of the question. The interaction resolution search part is basically they try to push it under the rug. Just like we pushed the knowledge acquisition part under the rug, most people, both in the Unix community who are writing those papers, as well as the rest of the world, think I have a nice plan, looks, reads well. Who cares about whether it's actually going to work or not? Somebody else will make sure it will work. Okay, and if you do that, then there's no search. So consider high-level plans like wedding plans for which there are enough generic recipes available in the training set and are described as sufficiently high level of abstraction that the execution issues are left to the imagination of people. Okay, and has been part of the human prompters who are required to give hints to the LLM to come up with plan variants that are more and more correct. And you call this chain of thought prompting, but you are solving. If you know the answer, why not just give it? You know, I mean, if you're teaching a student, I understand. It's a valuable thing that you're doing. If you're wasting your time trying to get LLM to come up with a 3-block stacking plan just by saying, 3-4 pages of steady prompt, back prompting, who are you interested? This is like the Rube Goldberg AI in action. Okay. So in fact, inner monologue, React, QOT, etc. These are examples from these papers. If you look at them, underneath all this jargon and all this, impressive looking brackets and square brackets, etc., they are essentially doing these task reduction schemas. And then they may not even be correct, but then the simulator might say yes or no, or the people will start giving hints, all clever hands. Okay, one of the interesting things is that inner monologue paper talks finally about block stacking, but the rest of units actually, blocks world is what making fun of, but they can't do well. So instead, they'll come up with all these other words. Some guys actually, these guys came up with a blocks world variant they called it 3-block stacking. Here's the key. They put the 2 blocks in the correct position. You guys should read, all Unix papers have 40-page supplements, nobody reads them. You should read them so that you will cringe like hell about how bad stuff is, how pseudoscience is getting done under LLMs in general and especially LLMs. So I can do 10,000 blocks problem where the 9,999 blocks are in the correct order, and I just have to put the last block at the top. Can we call 10,000 block problem? That makes no sense. Okay. There are all these other interesting ideas, quote unquote interesting ideas called chain of thought was not enough because it was only chain, and so now they have a tree of thoughts. The human is so damn jobless, that his he or she is allowing this LLM to work on different search tree paths. We used to have this kind of a not having life way back when we would go into the search queues of the planners and rearrange them. And we have seen the light and said, life is too short for doing that kind of nonsense. But if you can write a paper on that and call it tree of thought prompting, it's fine. Okay. Actually, I'll show you a thing about this in a minute because I was so sick about this whole tree of thought and tree of thought prompting that I made jumble of fuzzy thought prompting and then made a nice abstract. It looks exactly like Newton's abstract. Lots of people wanted the paper. It's one of my most viral tweets because people wanted that paper. It doesn't exist, and it's like you can make a joke and people won't understand if they don't know what the joke is. Okay. So what if we allowed LLMs to interact with the external planners and verifiers? That changes things completely because, as I mentioned earlier, but LLMs by themselves are across generating ideas. Now this part of it is possible. Okay, when you ask some friend of yours, "Hey, I'm stuck, give me an idea," and the friend is fascinated, they'll give a random idea. It's like they give it free, they just give it. If it is useful to you, if you are able to actually check if that idea works in your constraints and you use it, you will be grateful to your friend because your brain froze and you couldn't even generate this idea. Your friend did not check whether the idea is correct or wrong. They just gave an idea. Generation of ideas is very useful. In fact, what's his name, who got 2 Nobel Prizes, Linus Pauling, who got 2 Nobel Prizes, was asked, how are you so smart that you get 2 Nobel Prizes? And he says, I get a lot of ideas, I throw away the bad ones. That's a great way to live life. You see what I'm saying? The reason we won't go well is because sometimes we just freeze and we can't generate ideas. And our trusted LLM can generate ideas and somebody can outside test. That would be LLM modulo solving, just like SAT modulo solving, LLM modulo solving. That's a completely different game, where LLM is just a kind of a proverbial manager or an advisor who says, hey, I want to try this stuff. And then the student basically says, okay, let me try it. And they'll actually spend time. And if it works, they both get credit. If it doesn't work, the advisor says, no, you haven't been working very hard these days, which is fine because no papers. So how do you do LLMs as idea generators? As I said, I basically generated a plan from LLM, and then I gave it to Alfonso Genovese LPG, which it turns out, even though Alfonso did not make it public in the good old days, somebody has a version of it in GitHub, and my capable student was able to actually correct it, and it actually works. And so that LPG essentially takes this plan and corrects it. By the way, this is the right kind of planning to do, honestly. So there are ways you can use planners, but the way you actually take somebody's idea and correct it is through localized repairs. That was LPG. Okay, he basically had to make a random idea and then start from there. Here, LLM is giving a plan, and basically LPG just has to do it. And then LPG is working off of a known domain model. So when it says I'm stopping, it's correct because the same knowledge was given to this guy. This guy just basically throws the domain model out, throws the interactions out, and says, hey, here's the plan. Take it or leave it. And this guy actually checks. And if you do that, in fact, the performance improves. And not only that, LPG's performance also is better with LLM generated ideas than just random seeds, which should not be surprising. Because after all, the LLM is generating plans from the vast repository of human knowledge, except stored in a quote-unquote bloody way, basically as a trillion-gram completion model. So that's basically case-based planning. What I just showed you is LLM case-based planning, because I'm letting the LLM generate a case, and my friend Alfonso corrects it. Okay, and both of us are happy. How about back prompting? If we're generating ideas, if I have a friend and the friend can generate ideas, they don't know whether they're correct or wrong, but you know how to check whether they're problems. And if you say, yeah, this is very good, but can you know, I don't like this, there's this problem with this thing, can you come up with a better idea? And the friend comes with one more idea without knowing whether that idea is actually any better, but you check. One of us should know what is correct and wrong. Okay, checking verification is different from actually coming up with ideas. In fact, it's well known in mathematics. There are great mathematicians after whom conjectures are named. They are highly creative mathematicians who could see that this conjecture might be true, but they didn't know how to prove it. And then there are great mathematicians like Gregory Perelman, who is not particularly known for coming up with conjectures, but he can take a particular theorem and then spend days and days and days until he was able to get a correct. And those can, complement each other. And that's what we're trying to do here. So I have the prompt generator. I give it to a planning system. In particular, actually, I give it to val, which is just a verifier. All I need is a verifier. And then the verifier back prompt saying, okay, this plan is incorrect because this action has the following preconditions not holding. This stuff we can do. And then LLM comes up with a new plan. And then you check again. And then you see how many times this iteration takes. Now, the interesting thing about this is the length of the plan is no longer a huge albatross, huge problem for us, because coming up with a 10,000 action plan is only 10,000. It's linear in terms of if it takes some amount of seconds to come up with the next word, come up with 10,000 next words, it's 10,000 times that. That's it. There's no exponential increase. But the correctness is about the same, whether it's a 10 action plan or a 10,000 action plan. So don't fall for this idea that maybe LLMs are good for short plans, not for long plans. No such thing. That's orthogonal. Okay. So in fact, when you do this, basically, you see that the back prompting is actually a pretty good technique. We didn't this stuff about. In fact, all these things are in the same paper. And after we put like a 15 number of back prompts. After that, if the eval is happy, you'll say it's done. If not, you'll say, I don't like you as a friend. You don't seem to be coming with good ideas. I'll move on. I'll do FD or FF, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. And it turns out that it actually correctly getting 82% of the plans with this. So val, all of a sudden, is the star. It's just a verifier. In our community, what is val? That's not generating. But knowing whether something is correct or not is the first step in actually being able to generate the correct. And these guys, LLMs don't know, val knows, right? Okay, so but if LLMs can guess reasonable solutions, can't we just call them multiple times until they generate correct solution? Why do we need val? Just because, am I saying this because Derek is in the audience? No. It turns out that if nobody in the loop knows what is right or wrong, there is no guarantee that calling huge number of times improves. And yet, literature is full of examples where people say it improves performance. And it's because of that clever hands effect, if you look at it carefully. So that's my clever hands. That's the horse, by the way. That's the horse and that's the owner, clever hands. And I actually tweeted this the other day that, here is the edifice of LLM's impressive reasoning abilities and the prompter knowing the answer. And if you know the answer, why the heck are you asking? Because you want to write a paper. That's it. Okay. So think about that. And so humans unwittingly, unknowingly, non-deliberately giving away important hints is really the main reason why we think LLMs can do research. In fact, because of that, I said, forest of jumbled thoughts prompting, an ultra general way to use LLMs for solving, planning, reasoning, world peace, and climate change tasks. This is a great abstract. Please read this, one of my best abstracts. And lots and lots of people are interested. Basically, they wanted copies of the paper, etc. Because, like Reduced Shakespeare Company, the more you know the original, the funnier Reduced Shakespeare Company gets. You don't know what's wrong with COT, this is not particularly funny for you. You think it's actually serious. But I hope you won't take this to be serious. That's Reduced Shakespeare. Okay, so much so that New York Times quoted me. That's my my bucket list. I can actually retire. New York Times had a quotation of the day for me saying, if you don't know the answer to your question already, I wouldn't ask that question to any of these GPT-style systems because they don't know the truth. You know the truth. And if you actually give credit whenever it is correct and don't give any dings when it is incorrect, I have astrology that I would like to teach you about. Okay. Mechanized critiquing of LLM plans is the only reasonable thing to do with humans not in the loop. And I showed you one good example, that's back prompting. In fact, it turns out if you come to the tutorial, I'll tell you more about the variation of the mechanized back prompting techniques that can be used. This is of course the valve. You can have a simulator. Simulators also sometimes can give you the reasons. Some people think, oh, we're just using RL and the world will tell us. Where is the world when you stub your toe? Says, wow, you stubbed your toe because you walked this wrong way. World doesn't care. Okay, and you might die in the world. So this is nonsensical. So in fact, criticism from the world cannot be expected. Criticism from models and simulators can be expected. This is the feedback. And the last thing is the most laughable idea is the LLMs verifying their own plans. Supposedly, by just talking to themselves, they become magically more improved. I do have that bridge in Brooklyn I want to sell you, but I hope that you know that that's actually not going to work, in the real world. Now, one way LLM can improve itself by criticizing what it is doing is if, in fact, its critique portion has higher accuracy than its generator portion. For humans, it happens because we are lazily generating something and we're checking whether the steps are correct and you're. For LLMs, actually, off the shelf, their verification actually sucks even more than generation. Because verification, unfortunately, yes and no. And so it's very binary. Generation, all that requires is people being gullible enough to think, wow, it looks like a pretty darn good looking plan. And so, in fact, their verification abilities are not good. However, imagine you're doing fine tuning and you're fine tuning not only the LLM's ability to generate plans, but you're taking the same data and you're also fine tuning a separate copy of the LLM to actually verify yes or no. And remember, one of them would be a discriminative classifier, the other one is a generative one. And you do know, those of you who know machine learning, discriminative classifiers take less, they have lower sample complexity. So we actually did this, and in the PRL in Ichkai, there is a paper with Naman Arora and me, basically showing that if you do this, it actually does improve performance, and it's the reasonable way. There is no magic anymore because I just actually use the same data to train the verifier, and the verifier's improvement is higher than. LLMs for extracting planning knowledge is actually the way it makes sense to use LLMs. Basically, as I said, this is the stuff that these guys are banking on. All the Unix people are banking on. We are just ignoring it because we never thought models are an important thing. There will be some losers in the CAPS and other communities which care about it. But the rest of us are seriously into interaction resolution, nothing else at all. But we should care about where the models are coming. So in fact, there's a paper that I'll again show you later, where we actually show that you can use LLM's help in coming up with the domain models. Because they're actually good at coming up with things that are wrong, but then you can then do criticism of them with a human in the loop or some other specialized critics to improve the models. Now, if you ask the GPO guys, how do they do interactive model development? This is what they do. Except there has a person who had to actually come up with the original model. Here, this guy is giving it. And they basically, the bottleneck all of a sudden now is your patience, not the LLM's patience. And so, in fact, this is actually a paper under review. It's all the details and everything that I'll show you. The citation later. But it turns out that doing this is with the human in the loop and critiques as well as human in the loop. And so, at some point of time, you say, yeah, that looks like the kind of model I wanted to write. I stop. At that point, I have the model. You can then do any of the backdrop with ideas, etc. with that model. Then you are back in circulation again with using LLMs. Okay, so there's more details on this. We're running out of time. So actually, we show that in fact improves the amount of time that humans have to spend in coming up with the domain for the same amount of accuracy. One other thing where LLMs can be useful is, remember, that's what the Turkers have found. The Turkers have found that people want to do human subject studies to basically think what humans think of various preference questions. But all of that stuff is on the web anyway. LLMs actually might know majority preferences, not necessarily everybody's preference. In fact, my preferences they don't know because anything I like just disappears from the grocery store aisles because nobody else likes it. I've been very unhappy about that. But for the people who are those of you who are lucky enough to be in the majority, your preferences can actually be found by LLM. So there's a paper in ICML, it's oral in one of the LLMs and theory of mind workshop that basically shows, in fact, that they can actually show human preferences. And again, we have to do this with respect to cases where we happen to know the human preferences. So we used our own old papers where we had done human subject studies, and we tried to see if, in fact, LLMs are actually calibrated. Okay, so that sort of gives you an idea. The least ambitious use of LLMs is changing the format of data. They're good at it, but that's not what planning is about. But in fact, if you're looking for low-hanging fruit, that's what you would do. Okay, and so in fact, one of the things, which is a reasonable thing, which we did like 3 years back, I think Daniel supported this work, JP Morgan has tons of money. So which basically looked at recipes and then converted them into PDL format. There was a cottage industry of people who would read natural language techniques, natural language descriptions, and use RL or some specialized technique to convert this into PDL or whatever formal method. And then LLMs, GPT-3 at that time, right out of the box, was actually competitive with all these Ichikai papers, including one of my own. That's what they're good at. Okay, translation is what they're good at. Again, there's no 100% correctness, but they're a lot more suited for translation. But that's the thing that's hard for you. One of the biggest interesting things about LLM is what's hard for us and what's hard for them are different. And if you don't realize it, you are falsely surprised at their abilities. Okay, so that we could do text to plan using GPT-3. We call it GPT-3 plan, GPT-2 plan, and it basically shows that. The other much less ambitious one, at the risk of naming names, is so to actually just take the goal. What's your goal? I want to put A on B, C on D. Okay, I'll call LLM. It will say on A, B, and on C, D. Then I'll call Malte Helmut, who will then run the fast forward planner to actually come up with the plan. There, LLM is not doing anything. It's not doing reasoning at all. It's just doing translation. Surprisingly, LLM anything is such a good way to get papers that there are actually companies. Okay, so and in fact, some of them can be. There are degrees of silliness of this. One would be like, for example, some people have just directly converted the goal descriptions into on A, B, on B, C. Others have converted goal descriptions into STL specifications where it might be harder to actually convert this. And in fact, if you think about it, code as policies is really dependent on the fact that converting a simple code task into a big piece of code is excruciatingly hard for us and extremely easy for others. It's not planning, but it can do it. It's basically translation. Translating a command to a piece of code is what they're good at doing. If in fact the code size is the same as the command size, then that's the least ambitious use of LLMs. Because I can't imagine why you would justify training a gazillion parameter LLM just so that you can do this. So one of my favorite, how many of you know Rube Goldberg inventions? So Rube Goldberg is this famous guy who essentially would come up with these musical inventions. One of my favorite ones is this guy wanted his wife to fan him, and he's a sexist pig, I guess, and the wife had something else, so she didn't understand. So he's an engineer. He did a huge, big machine which has multiple fans, multiple compressor units, etc. At the end, it has a slight hand and it has fans. That's Rube Goldberg invention. So if you use LLM to convert, put A on B and C on D to on A, B, and on C D, just so that you can say, I have written an LLM planning paper, that's what you do. Okay, summary. You thought I'd never get done. These are the 4 papers that I actually mentioned. Those are ours. This one is much of the earlier part on the back prompting, as well as all the chain of thought prompting, as well as all that stuff. This one is how to get PDL models, tease it out of LLMs. This one is the GPT-3 to plan extraction, and this is the one where you train the verifier separately. Now you say, well, why isn't this paper in ICAPS? Because ICAPS people haven't heard of LLMs yet. So hopefully that's going to change now. Okay. So in conclusion, there is this distinction that you want to know between planning and LLMs, and it's very useful to keep in mind. And that none of us are right. We ignored certain things. Neurips people have ignored certain things. They both are important for planning, and it's important to know that. And then you have to understand. As somebody very beautifully put it, don't assume malice when stupidity can be the reason. Right? That's more generous. Assume people are just ignorant and try to help. So you waste your time on your tutorials instead of just making fun of them. But we make fun of them on the video tutorial, but that's okay. So that's basically the thing about why they're being trumpeted and why you shouldn't be doing that. And in the end, I want to end with this thing that I actually was going to use. I mean, this is what I said in the panel in the large language models. And I said this here, but I want to put in a slide form. For far too long, there's been a race to the bottom on the level of knowledge given to planners are SDMs. Okay. SDM is just a fancy schmancy word for planner. Okay. Planning started very knowledge based. Remember, Noah was an HTN planner. How many of you know Noah was an HTN planner? Yeah, that's why you have no hair. And he's in gray. And the rest, and one of the beautiful things about Santana is if you don't know the history, you are condemned to repeat it. That's not a curse, it's a blessing because you get to submit papers to NURIPS. You see what I'm saying? If you know you're repeating it, you won't submit papers. Right? Not having knowledge sometimes helps. Okay. So Noah was actually an HTML planner. It had soup code for plans and a whole bunch of critiques that will be looking at the plan and say, try to fix this, try to fix this. And its critiques were not even fully sound. For example, if there's a conflict, with a causal link conflict, that particular word didn't exist at that time, it will think the resolution is only promotion. It never considered demotion. Those were the good old days. They're not over yet. You get to write papers in LLMs and planning and submit to NURIPS, you get those things there. Okay. So it's important to know that knowledge-based planning actually, the golden age of knowledge-based planning is on us right now. RL is actually worse. When we fell down to saying, okay, we won't take HTM, we won't take case-based, it's all knowledge-based, we would certainly not take TL plan because Fahim is writing those pieces of knowledge. How dare he write it? How dare Dana write sharp schemas? It's all cheating. Let's just go with domain physics. RL people said, we can do better than you. We won't even want that. We will basically try to extremely slowly learn by trial and error using a simulator that somebody wrote instead of writing the domain model. Because most RL is basically based on simulators. They're even slower. So not surprisingly, the people who are the most worried right now are RL folks to some extent because code as policies essentially does hierarchical RL, quote unquote, much faster because it's asking LLMs to come up with essentially, high level classification schema. Okay. It's useful to know history so that you can repeat it. At least if you repeat it, you can write a good related section. LLMs change all this rather drastically. LLMs are making it easy to get knowledge without making it look like they're inconveniencing any specific human. Never mind that we inconvenience the entire humankind. They were writing the stuff, but we just copyrighted. They didn't copyright, so we just used it to train the entire LLM. And since it's already there, you might as well ask it all sorts of questions. And so it can give you approximate schemas. When was the last time you had knowledge engineers to give you approximate schema reduction for any possible domain? It's extremely hard to get. So don't sneeze at it. It's a useful thing. What you need to do is instead of just keeping doing this, good old, only interaction resolution is important. You have to ask yourself how to deal with approximate models. I mean, a guy happens to be me, came up with this idea called model light planning, which is essentially having models that are not guaranteed correct, but they're actually better than nothing. And that's the world that we currently are in. And it's actually a golden age for both, planning people from either side of the spectrum, and you can use it. So the $1 million question is, how would you be doing planning? Here, if you have some doddering know-it-all ready to give you any kind of knowledge about actions and effects, about aspiration schemas, about cases, they're not guaranteed to be correct. So it will reduce, essentially, it will change one idea, for example, that I've shown you, is you use this to generate a model with the human in the loop. And then you use the model to do back prompting, for example. That's just one idea. There's tons of other methods. All of them, I hope, are better than essentially taking on AB and on BC and then say, now I'm using LLMs. Okay. If this wasn't enough, I have a 3-hour version of this. where I talk even faster tomorrow. And I'll give you not only whatever I'm saying, but also how other people who are actually working in this constructively are actually adding to this. We mostly, I mostly talk about that. And in fact, these guys were supposed to be doing a tutorial. These guys, they didn't get visas. So I thought it was a good idea to give a tutorial, and the students will do it. Then I'll go to Old Town. And, thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
All right, so we're a little over time, but those of you who have pressing questions that you can't ask Raul tomorrow, you can ask Raul today. Anyone?
Yes, please go ahead.
I have one quick question. So, do you have any worry about LLM professor like teaching and like?
Yeah, so I'm not worried because to some extent, and that's a more general question about what happens if you can't set up exams. So I tell this, I mean, I haven't talked on LLMs that I gave at the department seminar. And you know that people, professors side know. Kids are always complaining that, oh my God, exams are painful. There are all these new questions. The hardest part of exam is coming up with new questions for which Google doesn't already have the answer. So since we don't want to do this, we say under lock and key, you should be in this room. We will have cameras trained on you because what if you check Google, then it will tell you the answer. Now, in general, we know that people doing well on question bank based training are not actually understanding how to do this. There's a meta question as to how much reasoning is actually needed. One of the interesting things about the modern world is that even people who don't know how to reason can survive. In the good old days, most of us would have died dead, right? Because if you don't know how to reason from scratch, there are all sorts of things. Now everything is standardized. So in fact, I think of civilization as this boon that was given such that even bozos like me can survive, even if I don't actually reason from first principles. And so the point is, we knew that giving true tests is hard. LLMs made it extremely obvious, right? Don't yell at the messenger, yell at yourself as to why you considered. So in fact, this is the same reason why LLMs do well on every possible standardized test. You know what standardized tests have? Every standardized test has a standardized question bank. And the reason you think that they still are reasonable is because nobody is so lifeless that they'll spend their entire life studying every possible question about this exam. You're depending on that. Well, comes LLM, it has no life. It has read everything. You know what I'm saying? And so it actually brings to open this interesting question about what is reasoning from first principles. When are you supposed to do it? You know that we ourselves are lazy. The first time you have to solve it, and after that we don't. And as I said, that beautiful question. Every beautiful question, the moment you say it aloud, it's no longer a beautiful question. So I actually once took AGRE, advanced GRE test when I was on undergrad. It's long enough back that PTS can't take it in my score. But I went to this exam and I had this sense of, normally I'm one of those people who used to wait until the proctor throws me out of it. Here, after first 20 minutes or something, I had nothing else left. I knew all the answers. Must be I'm brilliant, or my friends basically didn't listen to ETS dire warnings. ETS tells you, ETS is this testing service in the US. It tells you that you're not supposed to write the questions down that you have answered. How dare they? How do they actually control your mind? People in US apparently actually do that, and some of my friends apparently didn't. And so these people actually repeated the same exact question paper. So I was the brilliant guy. I had 950 out of whatever the heck. 950 out of 956 or something. So that's what basically will happen. If you know the answer, you'll use it. And that makes it harder to actually come up with. So in fact, there are some ideas, since you brought it up, there are some ideas people have tried, which is verify LLM's answer. Yeah. That tells you something. Because bozos will think, yeah, it looks good. Right? Imagine I ask a quantum mechanics question. It gives, LLMs give everything in beautiful form. And we have always conflated farm with hunting because they happen to be correlated. If you go to Oxford, you'll speak in this funny accent, and you also will know a few things. And so you say, maybe accent and the way you the answers. We knew it was wrong, but the correlation was holding enough that we could get by, even though it was a bad pseudo correlation. Enter LLMs. They can't say a damn thing that is ungrammatical. To make LLMs speak like bad ungrammatical English, you have to say, please act like you are a newly arrived Indian grad student. And then it has much less amount of data about that. I will use that. I don't know how people are not putting enough, INGLIS English data on the web, but apparently only grammatical English is there. You see what I'm saying? So the point basically is that you have to assume that we know that this was not the right way of testing, but checking whether the answer is correct. Let me leave you with one last thing. How many of you seen the movie Good Will Hunting? The rest of you watch it today, okay? There's a beautiful part in Good Will Hunting, those of you who have seen it will remember, where the professor basically tells Matt Damon character, where Matt Damon basically is this gifted guy and he can solve it, he can prove anything, and the professor wants to use him as his student and write more papers. And this guy loses interest at some point of time. He doesn't want to write any more of this thing because he said, this is too damn easy for me. Why the heck do I want it? And he just basically clears the paper. And then Professor Lambo says this achingly sad thing, that there are probably about 20 people in the world who can tell the difference between you and me. If you are at a high level of mathematical maturity, high level of planning maturity, high level of anything else, right? I can write something, most of you will believe it. Hector or Sheila or Derek will call me out. Do you see what I'm saying? So checking correctness is actually hard. And the second part of that Lambo statement is, and unfortunately, I am one of them. That's what makes him unhappy. When you know, so the people who can say that random junk and they don't know any better, they're happy people. People who write random junk and know that they're writing bad papers will have sad life. So try use that to your advantage. Thank you.
All right, that's a perfect way to end, right? Thanks, Rahul.
Okay.
And with that, the workshop concludes.
Much problem.